Welcome to the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. This is a podcast for male survivors of sexual abuse and assault, whether as a child or as an adult. Know that you are not alone and the abuse was not your fault. My name is Mike Chapman. I'm a certified recovery life coach and also a survivor. Let's find hope and healing together. And welcome to the Healing for Male Survivors podcast. I'm your host, Mike Chapman, and with me today is Jarrett Davis. More about him in a moment. And if you are joining us live, a reminder to my live audience, we honor anonymity. We will only state your name if you manually type it in with your comment or question. And if you would like to join us live on future podcasts, you can learn more about how to do so at polarlifeconsulting.com/live. And let me read Jarrett's intro. Jarrett Davis is a senior research scholar whose work over the past 15 years has focused on the boys, young men, and gender diverse individuals that anti-trafficking systems routinely overlook. From street-connected children in Southeast Asia to immigrant youth in the United States, his research centers the voices and expertise of survivors themselves, not as subjects, but as researchers of their own stories. His work has spanned international non-government organizations across Asia, Africa, Europe, and the United States. Jarrett is the founder of the UP Collective, a community-focused hub for shared resources and collaboration, and a senior research scholar with the Global Association of Human Trafficking Scholars, otherwise known as GAHTS, where he works alongside me on lived experience research. Yeah, I'm helping volunteer on some of their research, which has been really fascinating. Anyway, he is presently working within the New York City Department of Education on the expansion of a prevention education curriculum for staff and students across New York City public schools, as well as a project in Minnesota focused on justice-involved boys and young men. Jarrett is also a survivor of adult sexual assaults. So with that, we'll start the podcast like we do most weeks with 4 questions. Now it's time for 4 questions, that part of the podcast when we get to know our guest a bit better by asking a few questions. Let's go. So, Jarrett, what is your favorite food memory?
Favorite food? Now, I've lived in a lot of different places, so this is very context dependent. But I think, overarching, pizza has to be my favorite food. And, I'm a bit partial. Right now, I'm living in New York City, so I'm required to be partial to New York City pizza, which I love it.
Okay. Where is your favorite New York City pizza? That's the big question.
So there's a number. There's a couple that come to mind. There's L'Industrie, which is in the West Village. And then there's Vista, which is up on 2nd and 8th Street, I believe.
Is that Little Italy or?
That's up in Midtown, just okay. So my partner and I used to go to a gym there in that area, and then we would always go to that one place, and it just has the perfect crust, and it's crunchy, and that's my thing.
Cool. Yeah, that's a huge opinion. So was there a specific memory associated with that, or it's just in general you just love pizza?
It's always been I literally, since when I was a kid, that was always my favorite thing. And pizza party at McDonald's for my 5th birthday. That was just kind of, also I feel like maybe Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles might have inspired this a little bit. They always ate pizza.
Yes.
As a child of the 80s, kind of.
Yes. They loved their pizza. Yes, I remember that. Yeah. I was beyond my generation, but then my nieces and nephews were into that, and then I think my kids, it became less popular when my kids were coming up, so it was more Power Rangers and all that stuff. So,
yeah it was my sister.
Yeah,
my husband and I both, that's our thing. We do long walks around New York. We'll just kind of walk for hours, and we just do progressive dinner. We'll just kind of pick up pizza along the way, a slice at a time.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of nice.
Yeah, that'd be very nice. And I know the culture there is just so different. So much walking. I visited once, and it was just so much walking, but wonderful experience. So what is your favorite Christmas or holiday memory?
So my favorite, it probably was Christmas. Growing up, Christmas was definitely my favorite. time with grandma, grandpa, lots of food. You already are like winning me there. But I would say probably my favorite, or at least my most like pronounced Christmas memory is, I believe it was 1996, maybe 1997. I got a Nintendo 64, and I usually did not like, we got stuff for Christmas, and it was always good, a mixture of things, but that was like a monumental Christmas gift for me. And I played Mario for just, that was my job for the months that followed.
Right. Of course. Of course.
GoldenEye 007 was like my favorite game. That's my favorite thing, I think.
Wow. Yes. Yeah. I know. I was like Atari 2600 generation, and then my kids got into the Wii and the Xbox and all that stuff. So yeah. And try to teach me the games, and it's like, okay, I just want Pac-Man. I just want to go in a maze. I still can't figure out first person. It's like, okay, if they're in front of me, that's fine, because then I know I'm just controlling them. But if it's like, no, if it's me, first person, Call of Duty or
and the
whatever,
camera's moving, and
yeah, it's like, it's too much. I can't do it. Okay, all right. That's when I know my age is like, no. And they say, it's okay, Daddy, you can do it. It's like, no, no.
That's my goal. My goal is to get more into gaming again. Like my husband's a big gamer. Like, he plays all sorts of stuff, and like he brings me in on a lot of things. So we do multiplayer games. But like I'm like very like in my head a lot. So like I'm doing, and it's just, I'm trying to get into I want to do that hobby, but I just yeah.
Yeah, I do mobile phone games, and I've got my default. I spend like a good hour, usually over coffee, playing my set few video games I play every morning off my phone. And there's this little mazy. I've got a tower defense one, and yeah, just very easy games, and just don't have to think too hard. And yeah, it's just, yeah, I do enjoy that. No, nope. I did enjoy all of the Wii games where you're Lego, and then you're just going through the maze of stuff, collecting coins and go through the mission. And I think one of my favorite ones was they had a Superman, or it was like the DC superheroes. And you eventually can become Superman, but you have to get a certain level till you can fly. And then I can fly as Superman. That was like so cool. It's like, all right, okay, I like that. That was like best thing ever. It was my favorite of the Wii games. And yeah, and then there was like Indiana Jones and Star Wars, and it's basically the same game. You're just going through collecting coins through this big maze, reliving the adventures. And it's like, okay, all right, what do you hit to get more coins? And I can, okay, destroy that, I get coins. Okay, I don't know, but yeah, my kids took they're all in their late 20s, early 30s, and they took all that stuff, and so they each have all the different consoles, anything anymore. But that's okay, because I'll never use it. It's like they realized, have you used this? No. Okay, I'm taking it. All right.
Gotta get back in.
Yeah. So wait for grandkids, then we'll set up some of the old games, and they'll love them.
The excuse to jump back into gaming.
That's right. That's right.
You don't need an excuse. You can jump in whenever you want. I say it myself, who's trying to take up gaming.
Yeah, exactly. But I love my mobile games. So let's see. What is your favorite scripture or any inspirational quote that has helped you on your spiritual journey, and what about it speaks to you?
The first chapter of my life, I was in seminary and things like that. So I had a number that I really liked, but I guess there's several from Bonhoeffer that like I really, but I think the one that kind of really jumps out at me right now is actually is a quote, and it kind of, I feel like it summarizes a lot of things. It was something that was given to me very early on as I was just starting my journey, and it was, when you build a house, the house builds you. And it's something that brings me to, process is a part of the destination. Like the process going through the things that you learn along the way, the actual process of building builds you. You don't come with all of the skills, but the skills develop through that process, right? And it seems really simple, and it seemed really simple when I first heard it, but it's one of those quotes that has just kind of found me throughout each of the chapters of my life, I think. And it's been a reminder that don't forget the process. And don't underappreciate the process. Yeah. And there's a lot in there, I think, for me.
Cool. So, what is your favorite church or house of worship memory?
I had a lot of those. I would say that it's kind of tricky, like, because I have a lot of warm, fuzzy memories from childhood.
Right.
Like, my process of, like, coming out and stuff, I'm not presently in a faith community.
Hmm.
But I feel like it was the fellowship. It was the consistent, like having the third space, the community, like,
Mm. Right.
and the theology behind that of like God being a God of love
Right.
and being able to, there's just something that I think is very powerful about those third spaces, about having communities and actually living out faith with a community.
Right.
And,
Yeah, I think the term koinonia, that
koinonia, exactly.
concept
Yeah.
of fellowship, but it's an ingrained need that we all have for community, however that looks. And yeah, having community in church is a wonderful way to express that, and find that. And especially those of us who have maybe not wonderful family lives growing up, can find family within those communities. Yeah. Yeah, that's a lot of my favorite church memories are around fellowship with others for sure.
Like going to people's house. My mom was like, when I was growing up, my mom was the like the director of like care ministries at our church. So like we were always in people's houses and people were always in our houses. So it was just like a very like there was just a constant flow of people and things. And also being a neurodiverse kid, like I was never bored. Like, and I just like got to just jump, and I don't know. That's where I got a lot of, I think a lot of my personality, a lot of my identity developed, I think, in those kind of spaces.
Right. Absolutely. So let me get into your story. I know you mostly work with survivors, including male survivors and male trafficking survivors. And though you do have a bit of a abuse assault history as well. So, what kind of childhood things led you into going into this field? And what's your journey? How did you get into that? It sounds like you were in seminary for a while. So tell me about that whole journey that got you into being this researcher and all the things that you're doing. And then I'd love to also talk about your healing journey, because you've obviously had some trauma, what you've done to help overcome that, what things that have worked, what things haven't worked, and then more about all these wonderful things that you're doing with GAHTS and everything else.
Yeah, sure. I mean, really, like, I mean, my story is kind of, in some ways, it's still in development, but it has bounced from one thing to another, and in part, that is the house building me. That is me building the house and the house building
Right.
me, right?
Right.
So I grew up in a really conservative evangelical Christian community in rural Ohio. But I was also like, it wasn't just that, but I was also a kind of like, I was growing up at a very specific time, when there was a lot of messages of like, parents not trusting the government, parents like wanting to pull their kids out of school. So I was one of those kids that was homeschooled and was given a kind of more right-wing curriculum that I was raised with,
Right.
which kind of gave its spin on history and things. So a lot of that, which then now is the Heritage Foundation, focus on the family, James Dobson,
Right.
a lot of early emotional wounds and psychological wounds came from that. Like, not necessarily, I mean, like it's a double-edged sword, because there's so much of that community and meeting wonderful people, values
Right.
that I still have were all developed there. But then there was this kind of other narrative that was also happening, and I sort of, in that, I think, knew myself very early. Well, it's not that I knew that I was gay. I would have called myself as like, I struggled with same-sex attraction. And I never told anyone. Like, that was not even a word on my lips until I was like 22.
Right.
But I knew deep down that I was around the age of probably 9, something like that, and kind of really confirmed really like 11, around that age. And I was, of course, devastated, because in the community that I grew up in, there wasn't a distinction between being gay and being a pedophile. Like, it was literally the same thing.
Same thing.
And oftentimes it was even, you couldn't utter it. Like, it was like, well, those people are a little, ooh, he had a roommate and he's just a little funny, and like, we don't, and like, ugh, we couldn't even say the word.
Right.
So that, as a very young kid, I genuinely believed that secretly, without saying anything, that I was a pedophile, that I would grow up to be a pedophile,
Right.
realizing that it's completely developmentally normal for a kid to be attracted to kids.
Right.
So, but anyway, so I say that to say this, was a big part of, I think, my emotional journey, and a big part of my my abuse and exploitation story too, because that
Mm,
sort of sets the framework, the emotional insecurity, the kinds of conversations, messages, the words that I use to speak to myself.
right.
And so yeah, it was rough. I mean, and the thing is, like, it didn't. And I see this one, the poison of it, separate from the kind of faith and theology that I had developed, that I understood, that was based in God is a God of love. And I saw these kind of two worlds, but in some ways I was in a situation where it's like you can either have your spirituality or you can have your humanity, which includes your sexuality, being a full person, right? So you can either have this or you can have this. You can't have both. So my sexuality was pigeonholed here, and then my spirituality was pigeonholed here, and forever this battle went on. So I mean, in this kind of world, it was very, very narrow and kind of like it was very like boxed in. So I didn't really have an idea of what really jobs were out there for me. What I knew was that I cared about people, I cared about communities, I cared about really loved. Like as I was in ministry, I was working in the youth group, I was in the church for most of my childhood, doing like,
Right.
I mean, anytime the doors were open, we were there. Like I was doing extra service and things like that. And I loved it. Like that was just like I loved it. I kind of went into ministry because that's all I knew, and I think I was really I would have been a social worker, or social something like that, community development, social science. But what I knew was pastoring. So I went into that and assuming that things would change, and they with my sexuality, and they never did.
Right.
I got
Now,
into
was this when you went to seminary, or this is after you were
this
had
is this was
work?
my college,
Okay.
and then seminary was after college. So
Okay.
I
So you're
so
going
4
for a
years.
social work-ish kind of
I went
community
just for
service.
Yeah, probably for anthropology or something like that. But I went for religion and theology, and then when I graduated from there, I went to a sister school of my undergrad, which is in the Philippines,
Okay.
which is in Asia Pacific Nazarene Theological Seminary, which is a same denomination in on the outskirts of Manila in the Philippines.
So you grew up.
Ironically,
It was a Nazarene church that you grew up
it
in.
was Nazarene, yeah. So it's the same. And actually, ironically, the president of my college was actually used to be the president of the seminary in the Philippines. The pastor that I worked under, which I worked in a Korean holiness church in Cleveland, that pastor used to teach history at the same seminary. So it's like it was all these connections, right? And so it was kind of I just transitioned over there, and but it's interesting because it's a school that is entirely international. So it's like there's maybe like two other Americans at the school, and there's American and various European kind of like professors and Filipino and Korean and all sorts of stuff. So, but the student body was largely just like South Asia Pacific Islanders, things like that. So I was studying intercultural communication. I kind of was going into missions because that's all I knew at the time, and but I was really into like intercultural studies, intercultural communication, about understanding meaning making and that kind of stuff, and I had a wonderful time there. Like that was, I mean, I have to say, like that was the start of more than 10 years that I lived in Asia, and some of my most meaningful relationships. And I think really my identity kind of developed there in many ways because it was the first time I was outside of this where I grew up.
Right. Right.
And so yeah, I mean, I had some really deep friends there. And what was really cool is like the friends that I developed there, we were all kind of outsiders in various different ways. Some of us, I mean, none of us were openly gay, but a lot of people they were also very quiet. And we kind of sort of bonded a little bit over that. We never really came out like really saying open, but we all knew what we were talking about, you know. Yeah, but it was wonderful, and we kind of like ran the school a little bit because like we were like we were working and doing all this like service stuff, and like so the school kind of like, you know, they weren't sure about us because we were a little out there sometimes, and we stayed out late. We'd be out having coffee. We didn't drink alcohol because we don't do that. And we'd all having coffee until like 2 a.m. and just laughing and stuff like that. But we basically ran the school, so they weren't going to do anything about it. But anyway, very meaningful. The time that I spent there, that it happens to be that Glenn Miles, you have interviewed on this
Yes.
podcast, teaches in the Holistic Child Development Program and the PhD
Okay.
program at the same school. And I had already graduated by this time.
Hmm.
And I kind of got to know I was actually doing communications, so that I was a communications director at the school for briefly, like a year, like interim. And but Glenn, I met him there, and he was just getting started on work on men and boys because it was a gap that he understood was there. And we really hit it off. This part is, I feel like I'm going into a lot of detail, but this part was really key. Is that my master's thesis that I did at APNTS was extremely, I would say it's life-changing for me, really. Like it was, wasn't expecting for it to be, but I did a qualitative, research in a squatter relocation community on the outskirts of Manila. And it was a mission outreach church of the church that I was attending in Taytay, Rizal. And so this was kind of like a upper middle class Philippine church, and they were building this outreach church in this squatter relocation community, which was basically a dump. It was a dumping ground that people had been removed. The squatter community had been removed and placed in this dumping ground, and they had developed this whole community there. And so it was a really like socially, politically, economically marginalized community. And I looked at kind of the development, looked at identity, the development of identity in that, and how the relationship between the mother church and how they were locked in this relationship where this church couldn't actually grow and develop authentically on its own, because it really was only valid in as much as it could emulate what the mother church was doing, which is impossible. They don't have the resources for that.
Right.
And long story short, I met so many great relationships. It was really an immersive study. I spent more than a year working at that church, getting to know people, talking to people, doing all like ethnography. There was a hurricane, a typhoon that affected about halfway through. Hundreds of people died.
Wow.
And the community, it's in Arenda where I was at, is in a place called Floodway. And so when Manila flooded, devastation across the city, but this area stayed flooded for a month. And I mean like up to the second story of a lot of people's houses.
Right.
Families then had to move to the second floor, or some of them lived on the roof of their house for weeks at a time.
Wow.
To get to the church, there was makeshift boats that they had made. They would actually take the boat to the church. Several friends, one young child died of diphtheria that I was close with. Leptospirosis was everywhere. It was an extremely powerful study, but to actually see the resilience, but also how the community kind of came together, they sort of understood something at a deeper level than what the mother church even could.
Right.
Something that was more central to the image of God, right?
Mm-hmm.
Than what the forms of church were doing in the mother church. And long story short, I tied that up, and essentially that the thesis ended that it can't be solved. It can't be solved if the relationship doesn't change, if they are not free to actually grow. And so now we'll take a step back and think about this metaphorically. It wasn't until I was writing the preface to my thesis that I had this sort of come to Jesus moment where I was like, oh God, I've been researching myself this whole time.
Right.
And this was like after ages of doing research, and I was in tears, and I was just writing the last few words on my thesis. I was just like, Jesus, this was about me. And I mean, it stuck with me forever. But in the context of all of those other relationships that I had there, like really getting to see what community was, it became a foundation for my theology. But sadly, it didn't align with the theology of the church or the seminary that I had been educated in. So in some ways, I kind of jokingly say that I went to seminary and lost my faith. I don't know how true. I don't know if that's true or not. Depends on how you define things.
Right.
But I will tell you, shortly after that, I went back to the States for like 9 months. This is the longest, hardest 9 months of my life because I was different as a person.
Right.
I had learned Tagalog in the time that I was there. I spoke the language. This was like my whole world, my whole community. And really where I'd first come to know myself, going back to the States was so hard. Like, I didn't know who I was.
Right.
I didn't know who my family was. I remember having these like weird existential, I went like home for Christmas and I was just like, I'm literally like, I'm no longer in culture. I'm on the outside of it looking in, which I kind of had already always been anyway, but now in a different way.
Right.
Well, Glenn then, shortly after that, I'd only been in the States for like a few months, then it emailed, and they were working on this study in Siem Reap. They had finished something. It was looking at young males in the massage industry. So it was a massage. It's in like some of the tourist areas where it's a lot of exploitation, a lot of violence takes place. So we went with him and we did that. And we did the one study. And I was with just 50 people, which was a really hard study to do. We actually went directly to people one by one, kind of recruited people, like, hey, would you, like we're trying to learn more about what you experience from a day to day. It helps us to understand what kind of needs you have. I'm just very simple kind of. So we had these very structured conversations with people, and we sort of built a methodology that was very human-centered, but also rigorous. And we did it once, and then we had the opportunity to do it again. And I already had deep connections in the Philippines. So we ended up doing the similar study with males, sexually exploited males in the Philippines. We then ended up, and it just sort of snowballed from there. Like we ended up doing it in Chiang Mai with a partner organization. And in each place, we were building relationships. It was all built in relationships. And I remember at some point in time, it was shortly after that, we did stuff in Bangkok. And then, and this is over the course of several years. But I remember, as a part of this, I ended up spending a lot of time well, I guess you'd say in places in red light districts, but also in places that more or less, I guess you would call them brothels. I don't use that word lightly. Sex work is sex work, but there are other instances where there's not really other words for it.
Right.
But I do remember, though, the time that I spent. I still am, and I would do a lot of stuff within red light districts, and that's where but I remember being in those districts and thinking to myself, because I had spent so many years searching for the image of God in the halls of church, where God is kind of maybe gilded on the walls, right? I don't think I'd ever really felt closer to being with the image of God than in those studies. God was more real and present in those studies than I had ever experienced him in people doing the motions of church.
Right.
And this is partly where I almost quoted Bonhoeffer before. One of the things that I really like about Bonhoeffer is how he engages with the quote unquote secular world. I mean, he was a pacifist that a pacifist that was famous for having a plot to kill Hitler that brought him in that ended him up in prison. Right. But in prison, he wrote some of his most meaningful works, his letters and papers from prison, and I don't remember if this was part in the prison or not, but in one of his writings, Bonhoeffer, he wrote in one of his, I think it was letters and papers from prison, he was quoting Nietzsche, who is a famous atheist philosopher, right? And he was saying, basically quoting Nietzsche, he said, "God is dead, and we have killed him, and the churches are the tombs and sepulchres of God." But then he kind of pauses there and says, and I'm paraphrasing here, but essentially, okay, well, let's mourn the death of that God, that gilded God that we have on the walls. Let's mourn the death of that God and get over it so that we can get back to what has been there from the beginning. And it's sort of separating God from the forms that we've sort of locked him into. And I didn't mean to preach or anything, because I don't preach. But this is
You're actually doing well. So, yeah, I think that's so true in general of the church, that it's very closed-minded, very structured, that it's the religiosity of the church instead of the actual mission of Jesus reaching out to people, sharing, caring. The church should not be a hotel for saints, but a hospital for sinners.
Yeah.
So bring them in, help them. It's like, we can't have this people. It's like, that's what God wants the church to be his arms, his feet, an extension of his love. And some churches do that brilliantly. Other churches use it as a platform for manipulation, for power, so much abuse has happened within churches in the name of God. It's horrifying. And more stuff keeps coming out about more and more, just about every denomination ever has been named all across the spectrum, including non-Christian faiths. And it's everywhere. And people, I can use this house of worship as a front for me doing what I need to do. Cool.
Yep.
And it happens all the time. So I agree with that concept. Absolutely. That the church as a whole needs to do better.
Yeah. But that's kind of was a big part of my kind of development. And I think that's also the kind of what I bring to my research. And so it's my career, but it's not really my career. I'm going to say that, like, I was raised an evangelical and I'll always be an evangelical, but what message I'm sending might have changed. But there's good news and there's a message of hope. I think in some ways, like, I think I have found that a lot in the communities that I get to work with.
Right.
Because they're not dissimilar from the communities that I grew up in, even though they might speak a different language and be a world away. they're not different. Wherever you go, there you are.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
kind of the same.
Absolutely.
Not the
Yeah.
same, but it's kind of the same.
Right. Right. Yeah. So you've done the research. Now, where I know this sexual assault happened, do you want to talk about that? When did that occur in the time frame? Was that
Sure.
post college, post seminary, or
That was during seminary. Like I said, it was a first sexual experience. This actually was my first sexual experience. And it wasn't
but
until
it wasn't. It wasn't.
this was my first sexual experience.
But because it was assault.
Yeah, it wasn't something that. Well, see, that's the thing, and that's the other thing. And like we've talked
And
about
it's
too.
murky. And it's like, yeah, but like if a girl who's never had sex before gets raped, is that her first sexual experience?
Yeah.
No.
See, that's the thing is like outside looking in, but when you flip it and you're like
Right.
looking at
And
yourself, you're like, you just can't see it.
Right. Yeah,
I'd spot
I get
that
it.
from a mile away if someone else was telling me.
Right. So I'm framing that for you, on your behalf. No, that was a violent act perpetrated on you.
Yeah.
That was not consensual sex. And yeah, and then they say, well, it was my first sexual experience. Like, okay, well, I was a virgin when I got married, though, I mean, if you count all, I mean, holy crap. But none of that was consensual, so I'm not counting it.
Yep. No, that's fair.
But yeah.
But that was my first experience of
Yeah.
sexuality in a practical sense.
Right. And what a horrible first experience. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting too because, like, yeah, it's weird. In part, it's because of. It's like even for me, because so this is partly where you learn a lot about how intersectional power is, right? Because I'm thinking about myself, like this person was. I don't think he was younger than me. Maybe probably about the same age. We're around the same age. He might have been, a year younger, but he was a little bit smaller than me. He came from the province, like up, like in mountain province, and I mean, so he was just some of those very like you wouldn't expect, like it was the pressure, and still like of myself for some reason I still was framing it as if I was the one that had the power, that like, oh, I must have done something wrong.
Right.
Or, well, I am.
Was this a local or a transplant like you were?
This is a local. This is a Filipino, that's from Mountain Province. Yeah. And so I kept, thinking to myself, oh, this maybe, there's like, I keep wanting to blame myself. It's just like
which is very normal. We all blame ourselves. All survivors. It's like, that's the go-to. I must have done something wrong. I did something.
I was thinking of myself as like, as someone representing Christ, as a missionary in this country. I didn't see myself as a missionary necessarily. I was a student, but
right, still, yeah.
All of that kind of was going on in my head, right? But yeah, and like I said, it took a long time. I knew that it felt bad. I knew that it hated myself, hated him even more.
Yeah. It had the what's called the ick factor. This icky thing happened to you. And but so many men don't know, especially in dating or relationships or whatever, whether a child or adult, this icky thing happened. Or like a teenager. Yeah, it felt bad. But do we have the label? Okay, that was abuse. That was assault. Do we even know those labels? And because we're males, we physiologically respond to touch. So yes, we have erections, we have ejaculations, even if it's painful or unwanted, your body still responds.
Mm-hmm.
And then, okay, you feel like your body's betraying you from what you really want, but the body still is moving forward. And then there's all that. And then the perpetrator will use that against you. It's like, oh, see, you want this because you're responding. It's like,
exactly.
Right.
And the thing is, like, it doesn't appear, because like in your mind, when you're thinking about that you think that there's like violence or instrumental, like it is violence, but you think that there's more like aggression, anger, raised voices, tones. Oftentimes it's said with a smile.
Yeah, you're groomed. The perpetrator grooms you into getting you to a point to be able to do what he wants to do with you. And so you don't realize that it's violent. You don't realize it's forced. So they frame you into that place. And before you know it, wait, is this happening? Wait, what? And all of a sudden you're sliding down the slide and wait, what happened? Yeah, they're sly. Absolutely.
Yeah.
They're pros at grooming. This is what they do.
And the text messages and all that stuff that just precede and come after it, that just sort of,
Mm-hmm.
years before I even was like starting to consider, as I was like, I wonder if that wasn't consensual. But then I was like, well, do you understand what consent means? Like, no, it wasn't consensual.
Right.
You know,
Right.
like, yeah, it's wild how you can kind of know so much about power, control, exploitation, but not actually
Right. And then applying it to yourself. Yeah.
delayed emotional processing.
But like I tell everyone on my podcast, when I close the podcast every week, it was not your fault. I'm sure you know that, but we don't always.
It's hard to hear it. Like you hear it here, but it takes quite a few times to hear it down here.
Yes. So I'm going to do it again, right to camera. It was not your fault. It was not your fault. Hear that. So
I know it is. I appreciate you.
yeah.
I appreciate you telling me that.
Yeah. So that obviously informed your journey moving on. I mean, it was definitely one of those milestones that informed your journey for sure.
Yeah. And then, I mean, it was funny because that was in the Philippines, and the Philippines was it's also the place where I first kind of like said, okay, I find this person sexually attractive. I don't think there's I'm not going to, God made this. I'm not doing anything bad in my mind. I'm just literally, I'm appreciating what God made.
Right. Right. Yeah, we have an appreciation for beauty, and that's normal.
And so it's that thing of like realizing that like, hey, this first experience is not representative of what sex is, but also like that was where I slowly started to experiment. But the Philippines is it's a very like, there's a lot of shame and expectation, and that's kind of a thing in the Philippines.
A lot of religiosity, because I know Spanish settlers, like it was a Spanish colony originally, I believe.
They say that they spent 400 years in a convent and the last 80 in Hollywood, basically, is the way they describe Philippines.
Right, yeah. So they have that huge background, a lot of Catholics because of that, and a lot of Hispanic-ish names. And because it's from Spain, it's like, yes, they're Asian, but they're also Hispanic, and it's like this whole crossover.
You got Asian shame and Catholic guilt. You got all that. You got to deal with the worst.
Yeah. So there's a lot there culturally to try to navigate that. So
I'm really fortunate though, because like my mother-in-law now is like, so my husband's Filipino. My mother-in-law is just a wonderful woman. Like, she is a devout Catholic, but also with the same breath, she's also like works at the Department of Health in Manila.
Yes.
So she's like very up on things. Like she's one of those people. I hear her like talking, when I was with my husband. She's one of those moms that are like, now are you using protection? Things like that. I just find I'm like very blessed to have the mother-in-law that I have. He's just very very accepting. My husband like never had to come out really. He was accepted by her. Kind of cool.
Oh.
That can happen. Yeah. Anyway.
Interesting. How have you been able to heal from that trauma? I know you've said that it's taken several years, and even now you kind of struggle with the terms that, yes, was that really an assault? Was that really rape? Trying to label it and so forth. It was trauma. You experienced trauma. And how have you been able to deal with that trauma? How have you been able to try to heal from that trauma? What things have you tried, and what that have worked, and what things have you tried that have not worked?
I see that as a piece of the trauma. I don't see it as disconnected with the trauma that came before it, which was to my nervous system, to how me being separated from myself at a very early age.
Right. People
pleasing, trying to minimize. I was already in a lot of those trauma states before any of that ever happened. And I think that it is a lot of those dysregulated states that I was just living in and still struggle not to live in. I'm much better. I didn't have boundaries, like, 'cause I never really had learned them. I never really knew to establish them. I didn't think that was something that I was worth, because it just wasn't defined, especially sexuality for me, especially not between men. I was really well educated that I shouldn't push my ways with women. I was just like, okay, that's fine. I never had a girlfriend. That's not a problem. So it's just in some ways, like, everything was just out of I had never been prepared for this. And at the same time, I'd kind of been detached from my own body and my own experiences, my emotions.
Right.
So it's not those internal signals, just I couldn't get. Of course, now I would feel very different. Like now, if I was in that same situation, immediately I would know something. But so I don't know if that answered your question or not.
So have you gone to therapy? Have you
Yes.
tried things with, what things have you worked with your therapist? So just like cognitive behavioral therapy or other different modalities?
I saw an art therapist who was wonderful, and she just kind of got me started. She was the one that opened the door.
Art therapy! I love art therapy. Okay, and yeah.
One of the cool things about her, and I will say her name, is Carrie Hebert. I can spell her name, but I struggle to pronounce it. But anyway, she's lovely. An art therapist in Cambodia. She, I remember because we only probably had like 6-8 sessions together, something like that. But I trusted her, and she was someone that can be trusted. And I remember I was explaining something, and I was kind of talking with my hands like this. And she's like, "Wait, I want you to look at your hands. Like, look down at your hands." And just like, "What's in your hands?" I was like, "Well, I'm just gesturing." And I looked down, and he's like, "No, but what's in your hands?" And it's just like, "Oh, well, I guess it would be this. What do you see there? You know, like, what, do you want to draw it?" And I drew it, and I saw this. It just looked like a hunched over, sad marshmallow, kind of like in the fetal position. And that was, I was talking about myself as a child, just basically in that shut down, hiding state. I didn't know that I was talking about that yet, but that's what I saw in my hands.
Right.
So that kind of like opened up a few doors, and money was really tight. So I didn't really have a lot of I was having to pay cash because there's no insurance. Which is still very affordable and much more affordable in Cambodia.
I'm sure you're right. Yes.
But yeah, so but anyway, when I came back to the States, and as I've been through a lot of this research and stuff, I've found myself in all sorts of wild scenarios, and I'm being in places where I just have to kind of accept that that's what I'm seeing with my eyes right now. And I just need to accept that and move on. So there's a lot of times that I'm in an environment in field work where I'm just going to take that and I'm going to set it on the shelf. I'm going to tag it. I need to come back to it later in therapy because I think I'm going to need to come back to that. So there's, kind of had this shelf that I had been gathering of things that needed to come back to. As I came back to the States, I was moved to New York with my partner, and I eventually I finally got into therapy. Initially was treating ADHD, which was kind of the most apparent thing.
Right.
Then realized that it's not just ADHD. There's depression under there. There's anxiety. There's all sorts of stuff going on. It didn't have the language of saying that it was like complex post-traumatic stress. Right. I didn't have that language at the time.
Right.
But I think
so you mentioned that, and you kind of danced around childhood traumas. So what other traumas, other than just feeling like out of body from yourself and your own experiences, were there any other traumas? I know the A study, they list the top 10, but I mean, so many different things can be traumatic in childhood that can cause us to have issues as an adult. So what
physical violence, mostly physical violence.
With family members or
family members, emotional, a lot of emotional, just violent, basically parentification on one side. I mean, my mom comes from a really hard background, a lot of abuse in her background.
So was there an enmeshment with her? Because that was definitely my mom.
Something like that. Yeah, there's just a lot of like some just parentification, some of that kind of stuff. With my dad, it was more manipulative, like more a lot of shame, psychological kind of stuff. He's not physical. No, he's not anything like that. But that's partly why that's probably why I advocate a lot about psychological and emotional violence, because physical violence heals. But when you have emotional violence, especially identity level violence, right. At developmental parts of your life, it sets you on a journey, and you just keep building on a foundation that is designed to hurt you. And it just keeps hurting you. And that you just keep coming back to that. And then you go to try all the resources that you have to make it better, just keeps hurting you further. And so it compounds like that. Right. And also with like a lot of the dissociation that takes place there, then it's just, that's another thing where it's just like, everything's fine. Everything's always fine. We always, I know it's also PK. It's like in the right. My mom was a pastor, but like you're always on display for everyone, and everybody's looking up to you as the
So
exemplary.
that mask of
Yeah.
That good Christian model for the rest of the people. Yeah, I know. Yeah, pastors' kids, missionary kids. That's very, very common. Or
Yeah.
just, we have to put best face forward. I mean, a lot of cultures, a lot of families are like that.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
We don't talk about the dirt. Everything's a secret.
It helped me understand shame in Asia a lot better than saving face.
Yes, yes.
You're kind of the stepping stone.
We have a comment from the audience as well. Yes, being a pastor's kid is very tough as you are placed above everything. Yes, that people look at you for that. Absolutely. So, yeah, I hear that from so many who are in that situation. This concludes part 1 of my interview with Jarrett Davis. Join me next week for part 2 as we continue to learn more about Jarrett and all of his research that he has done and his own healing journey. If you would like to learn more about my coaching with Polar Live Consulting, where I provide one-on-one coaching and group coaching, both with a focus on healing for male survivors, reach out to me at polarliveconsulting.com. That is Polar spelled P-O-L-A-R. I would love to hear from you. I want to hear your story. If you would like your story featured on this podcast, contact me via my website. If you like this podcast, please rate and review because that's how other people can find me, and I really want to spread this message of healing and hope to others. And remember, you are not alone. Healing is possible, and the abuse was not your fault. Let me repeat that. The abuse was not your fault. See you next time on the Healing for Male Survivors podcast.